Warning, this podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised. In our society, most people are content to go through their daily lives safely and peacefully. But our society is not always safe or peaceful. For that reason, some men and women answer a higher calling to defend and protect their fellow man. You probably know someone who is one of these people, or maybe you are one of these people. The ones who see and do the things most people would never want to. These things are sometimes heroic and beautiful, but often they are horrific and terrifying. It's these things they don't share about with other people. It's these things they carry with them, so you don't have to. But when they get together, they talk to each other about them. And they call these stories war stories. Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom.
And I'm Chuck.
And we really appreciate our guest joining us from the future. We love to talk about how we get guests from the future.
Awesome.
And Lucy's with us. Lucy is a police officer in Australia. Specifically, what part of Australia are you a police officer in, Lucy? Because I know there's a system that's a little bit different in Australia.
Yeah. So I'm part of the West Australian Police. So Australia's broken up into 7 states, and I'm on the West Coast.
Got it. And am I to understand that each police force is based on which state you're in? Is that kind of, like, each one is run by the governor of that state, so it's kind of like a police force for the province or for the state? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. We have what we call state premiers, which I suppose is like governor. Yeah, so each state has their own police force, and then there is a Commonwealth police force, which is called the Australian Federal Police.
Right.
So they deal with the overarching legislation. Yeah.
Federal crimes, and it's like I know what you're talking about. Federal police. I get it. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How'd you end up getting into law enforcement? How long have you been in law enforcement? What your experience is, your background is?
Sure. So I joined WA Police almost 10 years ago. Sounds silly, but it's mostly because it sort of suited my personality, that kind of structure, in following the rules, I suppose, and I believed in my community, and I've always wanted to give back and take care of my community. That's always been a driving force for me. As a younger kid growing up, I always looked to the military and always wanted to sort of head that way. But at the time, women weren't really in like active roles. So that sort of put me off a little bit. And then as things got further along and I got a little bit older, I realized that I actually really love my country and I don't really want to leave. I want to live and work here. So police was it for me.
It's interesting how no matter where we interview people from in law enforcement, in firefighting, it's always the same. It's not you do it because, I thought I was going to make a ton of money. It's always, it was in me to want to give back and make the place I live better.
It's funny. Lucy, you and I joined around at this similar time frame. Been on for about 10 years, and for this about the same reasons. I had a family in law enforcement and stuff like that. I wanted to give back to my community and really take care of them. So that's interesting. It's pretty cool.
And so, how does it work? How does that process work in Australia when you make that decision? Is it college? Is it like a trade school? How do you get into law enforcement?
So here in Australia, we're so lucky. And I'll dive into that a little bit. So I didn't even finish high school. I had 2 jobs and I was paying my own school fees, and I got to year 11, so I was 16, and went, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this when I could just work full time? So I made that poor decision to leave school and just work. And
I made the same one.
yeah. And and then at about 22, I realized that I was just going around and around and around on a wheel that was never going to stop. And I wasn't going to get anywhere. So I looked at what the requirements were to enter the WA Police, Western Australian Police, WA Police. And I met all of them except for the fitness element. And as far as the education element was concerned, you just needed a year 10. You needed to have successfully completed year 10, which I had.
Wow.
And so the fitness was the only thing that I needed to work on, and got that squared away, and put my application in, which was, it was quite a long application. There was a bit in there where you had to really tell a story about yourself and why you were doing it. It's called a statement of claims. So did that. And it's funny, when the very first day that we started, or my squad and I think it was the principal of the academy, said, it's been a long and arduous process to get you here, and that was deliberate. So it was 18 months from the moment that I sent my application in to the moment that I was sitting there at the academy for my first day. So really, as long as you have the right attitude.
That sounds a decent amount of time.
Yeah. How long it took me?
Yeah. So and that is fairly standard. Some people, it took them about 8 months, and some people even longer. Some people had numerous attempts to get in. A bit worrying. Ended up getting in. Anyway,
you know what's more worrying?
Is when people have numerous get in.
When they have numerous attempts in the academy and they keep failing out. You're like,
oh, yeah. I won't. I have a friend who shall remain nameless, but yes, she had to fight the psych to get onto the department that she ultimately got onto, and she fought the psych, got onto the department, and then subsequently never made it through probation because
funny that
turns out the first shrink was right.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Like a 50-50. Half the time those shrinks are full of shit. The other half the time,
so that's the thing.
Something.
Like, I'm not saying that police shrinks are the best shrinks in the world, but you know, the hiring process ones seem to do a little bit better job than the healing process ones.
And it's pretty standard. There's certain things you're going to have to hit, and there's certain no-go zones. And you know, if you don't meet that standard, which isn't, for us, it's not particularly high.
Right.
So if you're not meeting that, then maybe you should.
True or false? I loved my father. True. Don't read into it. You either loved your dad or you didn't, right? Like, true or false? I want to be a fire truck. You know, true or false? I am fascinated by fire. True. Don't overthink it. You know, it's don't.
Yes, on all Autobots assemble.
Right. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. It's not hard to screw it up if you overthink it, but if you're overthinking it, maybe you're the kind of person that overthinks things, and maybe you shouldn't. It's not hard to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up questions of integrity as well. If you have to sit there and hum and ha about your answer, there's a difference between being careful in what you say, but just also being open and honest and transparent, which doesn't always serve you the best.
Yeah, when you're stuck with, I don't want to lie, but I also don't want to tell you what you're asking. Yeah, exactly. So you get through
process.
So you get through the whole process, and then is it a live-in academy? Or do you actually live on the premise? Okay, so you go home.
Yeah, so Western Australia has the state capital is Perth City, and the academy is in Perth. And I'm from the country, so I had to rearrange my entire life and move to Perth. And it was 6 months in the academy, and then probably about 2 weeks before you finish, you get given a piece of paper, and it's got like 1 to 3, pick a metropolitan area that you would prefer to go, and you may or may not get what you put in. Yeah.
Wish list.
Yeah, kind of makes you feel good that you've got maybe a little bit of control over where you're going to go.
Right. Theoretically.
Yeah, and there's always this term is operational necessity.
Department needs operational necessity.
So
6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah, so if they use that term, it means we like.
I love it. I love it when you say that's not in my job description, and they go, see this part of your job description that says and other duties as assigned.
Yeah. This big
that means
gray balloon over
I
here.
tell you to do is you're in your job description.
I got told to go somewhere for operational necessities, and I was like, I didn't put in for that. No. And they're like, yeah. Then I was like, silver lining. I don't have to be stuck at the area I did my probation at for any longer. So I'm no longer the new guy. I go somewhere else and I'm still the new guy, but I'm not the boot who was just there on training. And then I ended up really liking the place and sticking around, and it was cool. And so
it can work out. It can work out. Yeah.
Did you go to anywhere on your list?
Yeah. So when you first graduate, usually what happens, I don't know if you guys have the same thing, but we have got what's called the booze bus. And it's
a booze bus, a paddy wagon.
A booze bus. No. I literally mean like an enormous bus it's the size that could transport people from one side of the country to the other. Like, it's an enormous bus. And it's completely kitted out to be like a mobile police station. And inside are little alcoves that are done up so they contain drug, so like oral, because we do like oral samples for drug driving. And they have a machine for that. Actually, they don't anymore. That's all changed. But they did when I went through. And they also have a breath machine. And so what happens with the booze bus is they will have designated areas. So it's not actually really to catch lots of drink drivers. It's more about just getting the volume of traffic through, because it's a numbers game. So they will pull up on a highway, let's say. They'll pull up the bus and it's got like every conceivable flashing light and sign and everything. It's huge. So they'll set up all of the little probationary constables that have just come out of the academy will get out like little ants and run around and put cones out and get the whole area set up, shut down the highway, and put huge big like LED signs further back down the road, which people don't necessarily take much notice of and still nearly kill you as they come through.
Is this a DUI checkpoint?
Yeah. So,
and you're on a big checkpoint. Mobile DUI checkpoint run by nothing but academy graduates.
Oh, yeah. So, well,
I would like to go to court on that one.
Yeah, right.
They certainly outnumber the supervisors. So it is a good gig, and it's a very soft way to expose brand new people who are generally very young as well to dealing with the public. And you're in a role that people don't like. Like, people do not want to sit there and be stopped on their way to work or on their way home, and they haven't done anything wrong, and they're having to wait to do a breath test that's going to be negative. So it gives you that sort of soft ease it into dealing with conflict, realizing that not everyone likes you, and also you will stumble across some interesting stuff, like, because crooks, bad guys, they roll around in cars, and they carry interesting things in cars. And so depending on who your supervisors are, who is looking after you, you can have a really good time, and you can really get into cars, search them, find out who's in the cars. You'll get arrest warrants out of cars. You'll get people wanted for things.
Yeah,
I was really lucky.
Car stop searches.
So we call them QVSs, quality vehicle stops, where you're not just here, blow into this, yep, bye. You're actually taking notice of who's in the car, what they're doing. You're asking them questions, and you're really paying attention to what they say to you. and you're starting to develop investigative skills, I suppose.
Right.
You know, and that's the really easy way to get us little dumb bunnies straight out of the academy into that sort of, I'm a police officer, this is my job, I have to be, and being situationally aware as well. Being on a road,
You got to have your
where
head on the
cars,
road.
yeah, and the amount of times that you would get someone that had been drinking, so you're going to get them out of the car. And I never did this, and I watched in horror many, many times, and it's never ended, where the guys would get whoever it was out of the car, and then they would walk in front of them to the bus. I'm like, you don't know who that is, and you just turned your back on them. They're following you, and they know they're about to get on that bus, and they're about to blow into a machine, and their license is about to be taken away. So they're probably not that happy, and they're behind you. But anyway.
To this day, I walk around my office and people will hold the door open for me, and I'm like, no, you go,
No,
please.
Okay.
And they're like, no, please. And I'm like, nope, nobody walks behind me.
Hypervigilance, that's situational
just,
awareness.
It's just ingrained in us. I'd be interested to know. I mean, we have something similar in the United States with certain departments. For example, I know there are many sheriff's departments, including one of the biggest sheriff's departments in the world, LA County Sheriff, where one of the prerequisites to be a deputy sheriff on patrol is to be a deputy sheriff in the jail system that the sheriff also runs. So the sheriff's department controls the jails and controls the courts and controls patrol in unincorporated non-city areas here. Well, they start the deputies can be 19 years old and go work in the jail. So they go work in the jail at 19, 20 years old. They spend a couple of years there. They meet people in a safe environment that want to hurt them, and they learn how to handle those people properly. And then when they get their training wheels off after 2 or 3 years, they'll go out to an actual station and go to a patrol school.
A long time.
So
I do have to say the agency that you work for in Australia does it it's pretty smart that they do that, get new boots or rookies or whatever you want to call them to handle one of the most strayed away from stops there are, and that's suspected of drunk driving. I know experienced officers are like, I'm gonna just not go over here, because they're not familiar with it, because it's not something that they do on a daily basis, because we're not, a lot of agencies have traffic divisions and traffic officers who primarily deal with DUIs, and a regular patrol is not necessarily going to come in contact with a lot of those DUIs unless they're out there looking for it, because the call service and call volume is so much higher to deal with other things, that when it finally happens to them, they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And they don't like to handle them. Whereas you guys are coming straight out, bam, right into it. And I think that's a really good skill to learn. Not to mention you learn how to deal with a drunk person. Not to mention you learn how to deal with a really tricky report.
Yeah. See, Chuck, you have a totally different perspective than I do, because I don't know what that privilege is like. What I know is that when my ass got out of training, I was expected to handle everything from domestic violence reports to homicide investigations to DUI calls. And there was no detectives really to call out. There was no traffic unit to pawn it off on. So it's funny because I know, like, a lot of big city, big agency coppers, they get to see more shootings and stabbings, and they handle these things so often. And then when it comes to they end up stopping a car and they're drunk and they're like, oh crap, I forgot. Like, I remember this from the academy, but I haven't stopped a drunk driver. I've been so busy shagging calls.
What's funny is that, in the bigger agencies, it is really easy to kind of stray away from those DUI calls, because you're constantly dealing with other things. So it's easy to get stuck on these other calls and never handle a DUI for years, or maybe one every year, or maybe one every 2 years. And when I was going through the academy, they had a block period of instruction where they were like, okay, we're going to learn how to deal and talk to people who are victims of rape and sexual assault. And they're like, but you're really not going to come in contact with on patrol, because, it doesn't happen all the time. Those calls don't really come out. People don't really like to report them. So it's very rare that you're going to deal with them. Guess what? Day one on patrol,
Oh, no.
I was like 7 hours overtime with a rape victim. And I was like,
and ours was, you
what
will
the
interview the
fuck?
victim. Oh, dude, we interviewed the victim at the station. The detectives didn't take the initial, like the detectives did follow up later.
That's
Is that for
mad
you guys,
because
Lucy? Is that?
so not every single person straight out of the academy goes to the booze bus, but it is a very, very high percentage. And some of you will just go straight out to a police station, and you will just go out. What we call them general duties officers. So they're like patrol and inquiry. A call comes in for help, they're the ones that go.
Right.
So, and they've always partnered with, retract that, they are partnered with another officer. I was about to say they always partner with an experienced officer. That's not true.
They may just be partnered with an officer.
Yeah, that's no longer on probation.
varying experiences.
But
Experience is relative when you're short-staffed.
well, yeah. So interesting you say about the rape victim, because so how it works for us, and Western Australia is an enormous state, and so we have one metropolitan area, which is Perth, and that's broken up into separate divisions. I worked in the shadiest one, and I always laugh when you guys say about the South End. I was like,
It's always the South End, even in Australia, where the South End is the North End is. I don't know. Anyway,
we affectionately called it was SEM. So that was Southeast Metropolitan Area. So South,
Sounds
and
like
the
a
East,
shithole.
and it was awful. When I say it's awful, the jobs are pretty full on, and it's mainly domestic violence and mental health. Oh my god.
Is there a lot of apartments?
No, I mean there are really big apartment complexes, not big by your standards, but for us they are, and they're always a nightmare because you walk in and there's always like a courtyard area, which is great for the shithead that you're about to go deal with, who's standing on like the 6th floor,
Project.
and they can throw stuff at you.
I
So
love that this job is universal.
yeah. But I do remember going to one call, and it was any Aussie, like West Aussie copper that's listening to this will go, oh yeah, I know that place. It's called Nanine Place in Perth, and it's the apartment block was like a U shape, and to get in there, it was actually quite a drive to get in there, and the driveway was so narrow, and every single time I went in there, I wasn't the driver, because if I was a driver, I wouldn't have actually drove into the apartment complex. I would rather walk, thank you. So you would drive in,
Yep.
and you'd have to do like this stupid 50 million point turn to be able to get your car turned around so you could hightail it out if you wanted. That would take you like 40 seconds. So you've been observed the whole time, and they know you're there. They know you're coming.
And they've padded the walls and whistled and beat the bamboo telegraph.
And I remember this one day we went in there, and you do sort of get used to it, but always looking, and I just saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I look over, and I don't think it was directed at us because it was a fair way away from us. I think it was just, I don't even think they realized the police were there. But someone threw a microwave from like the 4th story, and it just hit the ground. It wasn't close to me. It was probably about 3 or 4 meters away. But if that had have hit me, like,
I mean, that's close enough.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
9
don't
feet,
think they were
12
aiming
feet.
for me. but
I would consider that rude.
Yeah.
It's a bit rude.
I never found out who threw it either. I was, oh well, goodbye. You have a good day. I'm over here doing, anyway. Yeah. So
how are you gonna heat up that hot pocket now, huh?
Yeah. So yeah, there's interesting places like that, and I would imagine it's kind of the same no matter where you go in the world.
And it's always the South End.
But sorry, just on that, where you were saying that you would have to interview the rape victims, we don't do that. So if I went to a job, and also like a legit rape victim is quite rare, like for us over here. However, rape's not rare. Like that, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's quite rare.
Legitimate rape victim.
Yeah,
reporting it to the police is rare.
Yeah.
And it's also not to say that the report calls are rare.
No, no,
the calls aren't rare, but the
No.
legitimate cases
Yep.
that are reported are.
So you would obviously get some sort of an account from the victim, try and figure out what you're dealing with. And then once you realize what you're dealing with, you'd be straight on the phone to detectives. And it would be, and I've found this, it's really not a good idea to start interviewing a victim of sexual assault unless you know what you're doing, because you only get one shot at it. And it is very, very uncomfortable when you are sitting in district court with an entire jury looking at you and a very well-educated, well-worded defense lawyer, like just smashing you about the interview that you conducted with a victim of sexual assault. And you start to realize that there were like questions you should have asked, maybe questions you shouldn't have asked. And they start asking you about the person's demeanor and things like, because they're trying to discredit them. But if you're brand new, you're going to miss a lot, and you only get one shot with those victims to get a really good account. And I didn't realize like how much hinges on their credibility and the quality of their victim statement. I learned the hard way.
Yeah, I can understand that. That would be, and for us, so I can say that for Chuck's experience going through the sexual assault portion or the rape portion of the academy, where they're like, yeah, you probably won't have, I mean, we're teaching it to you so you know how to do it. However, you're not going to experience it a lot. And for me in the academy, it was pretty much somebody coming in and saying the things you're saying, but also importing to you, hey, you are going to be dealing with this a lot around here. There's college, there's this, there's that, there's 2 prisons, there's, like you're going to be dealing with these kinds of reports. So pay attention. And they spent a lot of time in the academy on this is how you do it. And this is how you do it. Well, they brought in investigators. So we did get the training, but then what it became was it became incumbent on the training officers in the field is to really mentor you through that process so that you've seen multiple interviews done successfully before you even get to do your first one. And so
we don't
process,
have that. We don't have.
I was really lucky that I ended up working with he's a nice guy, but as a training officer, it's teaching you, he is a dick. And he was an expert in the field because he worked a specialized task force for sexual assaults and things like that. And so I benefited from it. And I was really lucky to have this guy teach me how to do investigations when it came to people who were victims of sexual assault. And man, I got to tell you, I handled more sexual assaults with this guy than I think with any other officer that I worked with on training. And I got to tell you, like my first one, I wrote like a 3 or 4 page report. He looks at it, boof, deletes it. And I was like, yeah. And then he writes it, has me read it, gives me as an exemplar, but made me work all the way through it for like 2 hours. And then right in front of my face, boom, just deletes it. And I was like, oh shit. And then he writes it in like 35 minutes because he was present with me during all the interviews, asked some questions that I didn't ask. And so I was able to learn from him as I'm asking these uncomfortable questions. And because it was a female who I was interviewing, so it was already uncomfortable. And she was cool with talking with us. And so I was able and benefited from that. But there's so many people who don't have that, and they get into court and they don't ask the right questions and they botch it. But we are lucky enough to have where we were able to call detectives, get advice, and then the detective immediately does a follow-up before it ever even goes to court. So they're able to ask questions that we didn't ask in the report, and then they are able to testify to it as well. But going to court,
so it kind of cuts out the patrol officer. If it goes to court, then 9 times out of 10,
not really.
If it goes to court, the patrol officer will his initial response, with the exception of maybe collection of evidence like clothing, will be negligible, and most of it will hinge on what the detectives do. But I could talk about the difference between Australia, policing in Australia and policing in the United States for hours because it's fascinating to me. However, we know you brought some great stories, so the floor is yours. You have, please, what is your story?
Sure. So we'll start towards the beginning of my career. So I think I was about maybe 6 months out. So I'd finished up at the booze bus and I had gone over to a police station in Southeast Metro. And yeah, and I had spent a couple of months on just like regular shift, normal patrols. So you do days and nights and afternoon shifts. And I was working with a team of probably about 10 other officers. And then, so there was this particular officer at our station that a position had to be made to accommodate him. And this yeah.
Who was he related to?
So he was a transitional police officer. So in Australia, we will recruit police from other countries, typically from the UK, because their style and it's all very, very similar. Their government's very, very similar. All of that. A lot of their legislation is very, very similar. However, we do recruit from other places as well. And one of them was Holland, which is where this officer was from. Anyway, so here's
Holland, yeah.
Holland, like as in Amsterdam.
like wooden shoes.
Oh, yeah. Dutch?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Holland.
Dutch. He was Dutch.
Real quick, I've been watching Ted Lasso, and they have a Dutchman on their football team, and they're very, very honest and blunt and straightforward, and don't really lie and will shoot straight off the hip, and kind of rude. Is that the same?
Yeah.
Is that true? Oh,
there
cool.
we go. Can't wait.
Awesome.
Anyway, I mean, that's not the story, but I'm just giving you an idea of who I was working with. And so this position that he'd been given was the warrants and VRO, which restraining orders. So restraining orders have to be served by a police officer on the bound person.
Sure.
So normally and warrants, as in like in your district, you have X amount of outstanding arrest warrants, people that have got arrest warrants. And normally what happens, and that is what happens, and this is the only place I've ever been where it's been done differently, is at the start of your shift, you'll be given a file with restraining orders for service, and your car, if you're not doing anything, that's your job. Like you and your partner that day are going to be serving those restraining orders. And another car will be given the warrant list, and your job, if you're not tasking and doing other things, will be to go and try and lock up these people that have got arrest warrants. And that works well. But anyway, not for the station that I was at. So he had his own little team, and there would be like the sacrificial probationary constable that would be rotated in and out with him, and I got rotated in. So I was stuck with him for a few months. Anyway.
With Mr.
Anyway,
Blunt.
this is a guy who just stood there like shocked, didn't even get on the radio and scream for help while I was being thrown around a kitchen on the back of some roided up like nutcase who,
he
by the
just
way,
wasn't prepared mentally.
No, and he just, anyway. So the only time that we would get to go to real jobs was if they were like what we call priority twos, so a lights and sirens job. So urgent jobs, and there's no other car available.
So your version of lights and sirens jobs is our version of a code 3 call, I think, because code 3 for us means lights and siren, and a call is a job, right?
Yeah.
So you guys have type 2 jobs.
Yeah, so we have different priorities. So priority 1 is like armed hold up, a child's been abducted. That's like the highest level. A police officer screaming for help because it'd be priority 2 is, it's still lights and sirens. You still need to get there as quickly as safe. So that's the only jobs that I got to go to while I was working with him were those, because there was no other vehicle available, and we were just rolling around with this stupid file that really didn't matter that much. I mean, they do, I suppose, matter, but anyway, so we get this, there's this job that's being broadcast over the radio. They need a car to go. It was outside of inside of our district, we have like little sub districts, and it was outside of where we would normally operate. not too far, but it was outside. So we put our hand up. I put our hand up and said, "Yep, we'll go." And I swear he probably just looked at me and was like, "I hate you," because he didn't like doing any work. Anyway, we get there, and funnily enough, the address was about 2 streets away from the police station of that sub-district, but they were busy with other jobs, so they couldn't go. We get there, we're second car on scene. We were like seconds behind a traffic vehicle. So we do have traffic police. And so it's really rare that they rock up to jobs, and they had. And I just remember I can't remember the fella, but I remember the female copper, and she walked out of the house and she was white and she didn't speak. And she just walked away. I was like, well, okay. Thank God the ambulance was already there and the paramedics were already inside. And it was two women, two female paramedics. So I walk in, and as I'm coming up to the front door, I can see, because it's like a solid wood door, but either side of it, these big panels of glass. I don't know why you would have your house like that, but anyway. So the glass.
I mean,
yeah.
You'd be surprised at some of the silly architecture you can see in the big city.
Why bother locking the
Yeah.
door?
Yep.
Yeah. So these
Hell,
people
don't even
had
have a door.
Yeah, just come in. That's fine.
It's fine.
So they had smashed the glass panel in, and it was big enough to fit an adult through. So these people had gone through the glass panel, and there was an old Irish guy who lived at the house. When I say old, I mean he was probably about 60 years old, and he was a bear. Like, he was huge, like pretty overweight, but he was still a really, really big, powerful man. And I walked in to the lounge room. I'd never seen so much blood, and I had been very lucky up until that point and not really going to anything that was that crazy. No real gore. I'd been to a couple of stabbings, but they were just like stabbed in the leg. It might have gone in a centimeter. Like, it wasn't anything mad. Walk in and there was just blood just everywhere. And this guy, he's lying on the ground in the middle of his lounge room. And there's one paramedic and she's like racing around, do whatever she's doing. The other paramedic is kneeling at his head, and she actually had his head pretty much pressed between her knees. So she was holding his face with her hands, and then she was squeezing her hands with her knees.
Oof.
Either side of his head. And I'm like, oh, this just doesn't look very good.
No.
And she goes, oh, hi, like that. I'm like, oh, hi. She goes, what's your name? I'm like, oh, my name's Lucy.
This is
And she
awkward.
goes, oh, excellent. Well, Lucy, you're going to come over here and do my job. And I'm like,
I don't even know what your job is.
and at that point, I'm like, I wonder if that's what she said to the other female copper, the one that just walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay, no worries. So I walked around to where she was, and she said, she's like, right, so you see what I'm doing? I'm like, yeah. She goes, so I need you to do this, but we're going to have to be really careful about like you getting your hand on there before I take the pressure off. And it, like, I couldn't really see, because there was just so much blood. I couldn't really see where it was coming from or what the injury was. The only thing I had clocked at that point was his thumbs were almost completely severed. Like, they were just hanging by a skin just on that
They
side.
were like broken backwards.
They were cut through at pretty much the joint.
Oh.
And like you could see all the cartilage and all of that. So that was the only like very obvious injury I could see, but there's just so much blood. And then so I
but still
down.
you're like, oh.
Yeah. I found out later why his thumbs were like that. But so I knelt down next to the paramedic, and we kind of did this weird little awkward shimmy, and I got into position, and she went to move her hand from his face, and I fumbled and I wasn't quick enough, and his entire cheek came away from his face. Yeah, so I could like, yeah, there was, you could see like the whole inside of his mouth.
Yeah.
And so he'd been cut from starting at about just on his temple, and the knife had tracked just below his eye, down to the side of his nose, straight down through his top lip, through the middle of his bottom lip, and then down along his jaw, like following his jawline back towards his ear. And so all of that was open. That wasn't the worst.
It's going to be
injury.
a hell of a scar.
Yeah. Oh, he'd wear it well. The worst injury was he had his throat slit. And I didn't realize that until I was like over the top of him. So his throat was slit. It wasn't all the way across. It was from pretty much like just below one of his ears to just over halfway. And there were, so he survived. And this is what saved his life. He was such a big guy and like so overweight. He had like this huge big pelican gullet of like
fat.
Yeah, like
neck fat.
Like,
Not anymore.
Yeah, neck fat. It was so it was this huge big, and it was probably a bit swollen by that point as well, but it was huge, like this huge big roll of fat under his chin. And that had saved him because they didn't actually crack his windpipe, and they missed his jugular and his carotid. They cut all of the tendons and the muscle and everything in his neck. And there was just all of like this bright yellow fat.
Yeah, I know exactly what, like I just see it in my head.
I've never seen that before. Oh, we got to see some interesting photos in the academy, but I'd never seen that in real life before. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm just over the top of him, just jamming his face back on, and he's almost like drowning in his own blood because he's bleeding into his mouth. He is trying, like he was legit. He was trying to tell us who had done this. He's trying his best. He's talking and his lips are doing other things, but he's still talking to us.
Yep.
Yeah. And he gave us a really good description, and he gave us a really good account of what happened. So how it all went down is he was actually on the phone to a friend of his. While he was on the phone, these people are trying to break into his house. He stayed on the phone to his friend, which is how the police got called, because they heard the entire thing happen. They were there on the phone listening to their friend get almost murdered. And so that's how the police were notified, and that's how we got there. So yeah, so quickly. And so he was, come to find out later, he was ex-IRA.
Oh.
And yeah, and he had come to Australia, and he had in his house, he had it was some phenomenal number, like 40 safes in his house. And he, because this obviously ended up going over to homicide, or like major crime detectives. So come to find out from them that he used to hold on to money for different underworld figures. That was his job. He was the money keeper. So these people obviously knew that, and they'd come to rob him. He was in a thigh to toe cast at the time, because about like 5 weeks earlier he'd been attacked. He was at a wedding and he'd been attacked by probably the same people after the same stuff, and they'd broken his leg. Yeah.
Second Amendment, brother. Second Amendment.
So you know what? I'm sure there was probably a few items in that house that would go bang.
There you go.
But he couldn't get to them. So these people, they broke in. It was three. It was two guys, one lady, and they broke in. They had wrestled him to the ground. They'd handcuffed him, and then this guy had sat on top of him. And I suppose it was kind of like, tell us where the money is, open the safes, or I'll stab you. And he would have just said, like, fuck you, I am not doing that. And they we'll start carving away, pretty much.
So the carving was like torture to get him to talk.
Yeah.
And the breaking of his thumbs.
Yeah, it
And
must have been the breaking of his
that's what
thumbs
it looked
too.
like. No, so this is the best bit. The thumbs, and he was telling us this. He goes, because they like knocked him over, handcuffed him, held him down, and the main guy have gone to the kitchen and got his own knives to use on him. And he sat on top of him, and when he started carving away, this big guy managed to get his arms from above his head down, and he grabbed, because the guy had a knife in each hand, he grabbed the blades.
Oh,
of
he
the
tried
knives.
to like the movies.
Oh, fuck.
Oh,
So he
oh.
he held on, and he lacerated all the inside of his hand, but yeah, nearly cut both thumbs off. And one of the knives, he snapped the blade out of it and stabbed this guy like
Hell
a
yeah.
whole heap of times. And he stabbed him really, really low down in the abdomen, like near his groin. And that's what all the blood was. It
Oh,
wasn't just
the
this
guy was bleeding out from like the femoral or something.
Yeah, he was dying. And so, because we didn't search the house, we just, by this stage, like it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's more and more.
Right. They packed that dude up and rushed him off before you got there.
So
sure.
our job was to go with the ambulance because we thought he was going to die. So we needed to be with him.
Dying declaration.
Get as much information as we could because we thought he was going to die. So when they searched the house, they found this huge blood trail that went out the back into the backyard and then over the fence. So all the bad guys had fled and gone their separate ways. And it was probably about 3 or 4 hours later, there was an ambulance call for a guy who was bleeding to death in his car. He parked it at a fuel station, and I think he was trying to get to our biggest hospital in Perth, which is called Royal Perth Hospital, because he was very, very close to the hospital. And that was it. He couldn't go any further. And then he finally called an ambulance, and they got there. And we knew that either we were going to find a body,
right,
or they were going to end up in hospital. So he got caught. And but I remember going in, and so all of that kind of happened behind the scenes. I didn't really know about that until later. But went into hospital with the Irish guy, and it was kind of like in the movies where there's like that push and shove between the cops and the doctors. And so he is trying to tell us, and he would not shut up. And I wasn't even asking him any questions. He was telling us everything he could, because I think
you're just like, I'm trying to write.
Yeah. I think he realized he was probably not going to survive. And this doctor is like literally shoving his face, like, just go away. If you don't go away, like if he keeps talking, he's going to die. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
Right. You're like, oh, wait. So if we stop talking to him, we can talk to him later. But if we keep talking to him, we'll never be able to talk to him again.
Yeah. So what did I say, like when I was talking about the person I was working with? So like that's my memory of it. And I don't remember him at all during that whole scenario. Like there was no teamwork, there was nothing. It was me writing everything. I did the incident report. I did the handover with the detectives, and I was very, very new. But yeah, since that I've never ever been to a more gory scene than that. And
yeah, that's a pretty good one. I mean, head wounds bleed, so I can imagine the neck and the face were just bleeding profusely, even without hitting an artery or a vein. But that's just head wounds bleed, right? And then you add to that somebody got nicked in the abdomen near the groin where the gut.
That'd be bad.
That gravity alone will just pull blood right out of your freaking.
Well, so the guy that got stabbed in the lower abdomen, he because in the lounge room there are all these plastic bags, and they were all covered in blood, like plastic shopping bags. So what made sense later, because what he'd actually done was he had got a plastic shopping bag and like put a hole in it at the bottom and put his foot through it, and then like shimmied it up his leg and somehow secured it.
Tried to make a blood diaper?
Yeah, like he secured it over the wound, which I don't know, maybe that helped him. You do strange things when you're like dying.
Right.
Yeah, so he was
This
down
plastic bag looks
plastic
like a
bag.
great bandage.
Yeah, but
Oh, man.
yeah, but I mean, it's funny because like that one never ever kept me up at night. Never bothered me at all, not at all. I think because the guy wasn't what I would consider like a true victim. And to
Right.
me, like a
We
true victim is someone
jokingly used to
who,
call it no humans involved.
yeah, yeah, pretty much.
I mean, you guys
Yeah.
can't say that, but I'm retired. I can say it. It was like, okay, a piece of shit attacked another piece of shit, and kind of street justice happened.
Yeah.
I mean,
Kind of karma on both sides.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, you know, if he wasn't the person that he was, he wouldn't have been targeted and he wouldn't have ended up in that position. But
That's what Omar calls
yeah,
being in the game.
yeah. And like that's very unusual for Australia. Like that doesn't really happen that often. Like we do have organized crime that's very much alive and well, but we don't have that kind of like all out street violence of this is my turf, that's yours, you stay on your side of the fence, I stay on mine, you can't do business here. That
Like
like
gang
there's none of
warfare.
that. Yeah, there's just none of that. It does happen in the background, but it's kept really quiet. It really doesn't raise the police's attention when it does happen, and it's only when it really spills out and it's, you know, it has gone. There's probably been a lot of things been happening, and then finally it becomes very, very public. But yeah, it's very unusual for here that kind of stuff happens. So that was a good one. Like I've never been to one since like that. Yeah,
It's interesting
it was good.
when you get to something where you go, wait, is this actually happening? Like,
Yeah, weird. You're like, that's in like
you get a weird
it's like,
out of body
it's not scary.
experience.
Yeah,
No,
you're
yeah.
like, oh, that doesn't quite look like car crashes are the worst ones for that, where you're just like, how do your head do that? Like, how does
Right.
Yeah.
how's your body around that? Yeah, but
Yeah, there becomes you become emotionally detached. You may experience the emotions later.
Yeah.
But you become detached in the moment because you have to do your job. And so your mind goes to this weird place where you're just like, heads aren't supposed to point that way. I haven't seen one point that way before.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I will tell you, I remember going to a traffic collision where, and I think I've told this story before, just this portion of it, where when the driver was finally found, I finally found her. I couldn't see her head, just her arms and shoulders sticking out from underneath the car.
Yeah.
And I
this
thought,
one.
oh, she's got no head. I'm gonna have to get the helicopter up and go looking in the field with the infrared because it's still warm and we're never gonna. It was underneath her, you know. But
Like over here.
but that was like, oh, okay, we found it. We're good. Like you have this weird moment of not the later on. I was like, oh, that's a horrible way to go. And the kind of the emotions of it hit you later. But in the moment, you're like,
yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, I don't have to go trudging through the field looking for the head.
Yeah,
I
we
really did not want to do that.
We call it emu bobbing. So,
Emu? Like
yeah, emu.
the bird?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the scary as fuck bird.
They're no joke. They're no joke. And they are suicidal bastards. Anyway, they will like run. So you see them on the side of the road, and they'll run towards your car. So you slow down, and then they'll change direction, just go back the way they came, and then they're like, no, I actually want to die, and then straight back into your car. They're just
goddamn
ridiculous.
suicidal baby dinosaurs with feathers.
Wow.
Crazy. Yeah. So the term that we gave them, because I worked in some pretty remote locations where there was lots of emus, was turbo chooks. But emu bobbing is when you go to a really bad crash and there's or like a train accident, anything where there's bits of people for a very long way, and you spend like hours just bobbing down,
bending down. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And it's like a race against the crows.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we call it emu bobbing. I haven't had to do that yet, so
we don't pick that stuff up. We leave it for the corner.
Oh,
Sometimes
so
we had to.
no, that's our job.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
sometimes we had to do that
Yeah.
because the coroners were the deputies and the deputies were your friends. And so when the deputies came out and had to
Yeah.
pick up parts, they were like, "Hey, I'm like, all right, buddy.
Yeah, you're gonna suffer alongside
You owe me
me.
breakfast. You owe me breakfast when we get
Yeah.
off a graveyard shift."
No, we're just like, yeah, we'll hold traffic. Have fun.
Yeah.
What
No,
weird thing is that body parts, when they're off of people and there's no more life in them, they don't look real. And you can
No.
mistake a body part for like a tennis ball, not a tennis ball, a basketball. I
Well,
almost
for a
stepped on
lot of
someone's-
things, like yeah, you can.
their
It
skull.
doesn't look like it's supposed to be there. It
I almost
just
stepped on one.
Yeah.
A skull, the top of a skull.
Yeah.
Popped
It's
off,
just-
and the brains.
Oh.
yeah.
No.
And man, we had such a good time that we only got through one of your stories, and I know you brought
Yeah.
several.
Three more.
We'd love to have you back anytime you want.
Sure.
I find this stuff fascinating, and I love to compare and contrast how the job is different, meaning the administrative, the how you get hired, how you get on the street. Like the fact that you guys don't have training officers that help you right out of the academy. I mean, the minimum in California was 16 weeks that you had to be married to this training officer.
No.
And at larger agencies like LAPD, you're going to spend a year with that person, or with
we don't have
multiple
that.
training officers. So, that's mind boggling to me that you wouldn't at least have, some time where you just rode around with an experienced officer for a long period of time.
You could be like a day off probation and you'll be taking out a brand new probationer like a day out of the academy. That'll end well.
Wow. That's kind of interesting. But you
That's
learn a lot, I
very
bet.
different.
Real quick, off topic, because you're in Australia, what is the craziest thing that you found in your house?
Oh, because everything in Australia is trying to kill you. Is that
Yeah.
why, Chuck?
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah. I've seen like snakes like curled around a toilet bowl, big ass
Yeah.
tarantulas. Like, yeah, I'm good with
Yeah.
that. But,
Yeah.
have
So
you had that?
I mean, spiders are that's just normal. I hate spiders.
I mean, tarantulas.
So no,
Let's be real. You guys don't have regular spiders.
they're like kind of
Sure they
baggy.
do. They just also
Yeah.
have spiders
like
the size of your
called-
face.
They're called huntsmans.
Yes, the
And they're
huntsman
fluffy.
spiders, dude.
Mm,
Oh.
yeah, and we have another one which they're worse because they have these enormous webs. They're called golden orb spiders.
Yes, those things are crazy.
Oh, I don't like those. Yeah. No. So a few years ago, I lived and worked in a town called Eucla, which is a border town. So it's on the border of South Australia and Western Australia. So if you drew a line straight down the center of Australia from the top to the bottom, we would be right on the bottom. Like we're pretty much like halfway of the landmass, like on the bottom coast of Australia.
Like up in the inside of the horseshoe.
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. Yeah, of the
All
Great
right.
Australian Bight. Yeah.
Sure.
So that place has a lot of things that will end you basically. There's like sharks that cruise around about 20 meters offshore, so you don't go swimming. There's death adders, there's snakes, there's spiders.
Yeah, any
dingoes
snake
or-
with the name
dingoes are
adder. Dingoes
Yeah.
seem cool though.
They are, but people make
Okay,
the
true or
mistake
false? You
of-
can get a
of thinking that they're
domesticated
dog.
dingo.
You can, but that's illegal.
Okay, so it's doable,
And
but it's not
it
supposed to
is,
be done.
and it does happen, and there's a pretty big black market for it of like half breeds and stuff like that. And I've come across a couple in my time in the job, like going to people's houses and that, and they are not a real, like they're different. They're not. Yeah, I wouldn't mess with them. They've got the crazy eyes. But the craziest thing, and I didn't see it, but my husband, who's also a police officer, went home to get his lunch because he'd forgotten his lunch. And our house there was like the police station, the officer in charge of the police station's house, and then our house. So our house is like 30 meters from the police station. So it was like
That's
50
convenient.
50 yards. Yeah. So he's walked home, and it was a hot day, and there was always snakes. Like we'd always see snakes on the road, or just that was just part and parcel of being there. And he's got home, and it would have been like 3 minutes later, he bursts back into the police station. I'm sitting there like, eating my lunch, and he's like white. My husband is a brown man, and he was white. He's like, and he's sweating, and he's like out of breath, and he's like stone cold Steve Austin. Like he nothing upsets him, nothing gets him riled up at all. And he was like bouncing off the rev limiter. What's going on? He goes, there was a snake. So this snake, our house was clad in weatherboard on the outside, and it was at our front door, and it was like a big brown snake, which is one of the most deadliest snakes in the world. And it was trying to slither up the weatherboard. Like, I suppose it was trying to get away from, like, get out of the sun, or like get under the eaves of the house. I don't know. But
yeah, you don't want one of those in the eaves of your damn house.
Yeah. And after that, I had massive anxiety about there being a snake in our house.
My wife would make us move.
We had a cat, and she, every now and then, she would like growl and carry on in the dead of night, and I always think, oh God, it's a snake in our house. Yeah, but we had a couple come into the station, like into the police station, like little ones. Yeah, so snakes is probably up there with the worst thing you're going to find in your house in Australia.
See, and I've had pet snakes. I've had them. I don't mind snakes,
no.
but the snakes in Australia, that's a whole different thing. Like I don't want to mess with, at least the snakes in the United States, for the most part, if they don't rattle at you, you don't have to worry too much. There's some in the South and other regions, but the rattle lets you know. The ones in friggin',
I think you've got,
have to assume every snake in Australia is trying to kill you.
I think we've got, it's something mad, like 75% of all of the world's venomous snakes are in Australia.
Yep. Nope, I'm good.
I think that's the number. But that
sounds right.
That's enough for me.
I'm going with it. That sounds right. So, well,
but that's like a good little segue for the next story that I'll tell you later.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay, well, we'll have to have you back for that. Chuck, will make sure you get that schedule, because now it's going to be a snake story, and I'm all for it. Well, Lucy, we always give our guests a chance to dedicate their episode to a brother or sister, officer, or firefighter, or veteran who's passed on. And Chuck says you have somebody that you'd like to dedicate your episode to.
So I went through, so in the academy, we had two squads. So I was in grey squad, and our sister squad, which goes through at the same time, was green squad. And when I graduated the academy and went on to the booze bus, I was put into a booze bus team that was made up of the guys from green squad. One of those guys was just a brilliant person, and he joined the job late. He joined at 40. And he was super hardworking. He spent the first 20 years of his adult life as a truck driver, just driving east to west coast. Really experienced guy, and just had a lot of passion. Really, really, really great person. So much so that when I was out at UCLA, because it's a really hard place to get people to come to, we had a vacancy, and I messaged him and I said, hey, like, this place would really suit you. I know you're single, you like working hard, like, we need good people out here. Would you come? He messaged me back, and I kept the message, saying, oh, I've always wanted to go bush, and like that would be a really good spot, but I've just started on this new team at work, and I'm having such a good time, and I really want to like see this through. So, good for you, like good on you. And the day that I left UCLA, that I drove out of UCLA, he went to work, and he obviously had a few demons, and he went to work, and he lost his fight with those demons that day, and he ended his life at work on the job, and that was, so when I finally got into my hotel that night, it was all over the news, and and I found out that it was this wonderful person that I'd spent like the first few very important months of my policing career working very closely with.
Right.
Yeah. So I would like to dedicate this to Darren Eagleston. He was, I think he was about 47 when he died. And yeah, so I'd like to dedicate this episode to him. Wonderful, wonderful person he was.
Well, rest easy, brother. We got it from here. And remember, if reach out, it doesn't ever have to be to that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So reach out.
Exactly.
Reach out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you know what? It was a good thing for like a learning curve. Like
yeah, there's probably some people that it got a wake up call from it that maybe needed it.
Yeah.
So if you can take a positive from it, that would be that, I'm sure. So, well, Chuck, you have announcements before we go?
Yeah, real quick. Real quick, you guys are listening. I know some of you guys don't follow Instagram, Facebook, but if you want to come onto the show, email us at booking.warstories@gmail.com, or make an account. Go to Facebook, Instagram, go to the bio, click the link, and then you can reach us there. And if you have questions, you can also reach us there. And stay tuned. We have some shirt, not shirts. We have a piece of clothing coming.
We give out some hints. We've had some people guessing as to what it is.
There's one person who's real close. I don't know.
Yeah.
You might be spot on. You might not. You might be far off. But anyways, it'll be pretty cool. It should be the shipment should be here soon. So we're just waiting on delivery now, and then as soon as that is here, it'll be released here. So hopefully by another week, it'll be here. And then when we release it and promote it. But yeah, if you want to come on the show, booking.warstories@gmail.com.
And it's a good Christmas present. It is a good Christmas present.
It is. So hopefully, I'm so hoping we get them before Christmas. I mean, they're already in transit. They should be in the port. We're just waiting on that container to come in.
Backlog of those dang. Well, it could be sitting there waiting to be unloaded at this point, the way Los Angeles is being run.
It could be.
Well, Lucy, thank you for being with us. I know, with time difference and stuff, sometimes scheduling this can be tough. And I know it sounds like you've got a 1-year-old. So even getting an hour to sit and chat with us about police work is tough because, police work may be hard, but being a parent is even harder.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can't beat your child as hard as you can beat a suspect sometimes.
Probably not with the climate industry.
Exactly. Oh man. Well, it's all right. At least hopefully the kids are the reason we're doing all this, because they'll leave it a better place than we found it, right? So, I appreciate you coming on, and until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.